The courtroom was silent. Every eye in the room was locked onto the man standing before the judge. His hands were steady, but his heart pounded in his chest. Just months ago, he had been sitting in a cold jail cell, convicted of a crime he didn't commit. His life had been torn apart, not because of what he did, but because of a lie. A lie told by the very person sworn to protect justice. A cop. His name was Marcus Reynolds, a hardworking man with no criminal record, no history of trouble. He had a family, a job and dreams like anyone else. But all of that changed the day he was arrested. The officer claimed he saw Marcus committing a crime, one that Marcus knew he had no part in. There was no solid evidence, no witnesses, just the word of one officer against his. And in that moment, the system turned against him. The trial was swift. The judge, a woman known for her strict sentencing, didn't hesitate. Marcus was sent away, his pleas for innocence ignored. Behind bars, Marcus lost everything. His job, his reputation, his trust in the world. His family struggled, and every day he wondered how this could have happened. But fate has a way of revealing the truth. A piece of evidence surfaced, something the officer had hidden. It was undeniable proof that Marcus had been framed. When the truth finally came out, the same courtroom that had sentenced him was forced to set him free. But for Marcus, freedom wasn't enough. Now he stood face to face with the judge who had once dismissed his words. He could see the regret in her eyes, the weight of what she had done. But he wasn't here for revenge. No, Marcus had something else in mind, something that would leave the entire courtroom in shock. And when he did it, the judge couldn't hold back her tears. The courtroom felt heavy with silence, but Marcus's voice was calm as he spoke. "I spent 14 months in a cell for something I didn't do," he said, his eyes never leaving the judge's. 14 months of nights wondering how my life got destroyed by a lie. The people in the room listened closely, jurors, reporters, even the officer who had caused all of this. But it was the judge whose face showed the most emotion. She hadn't forgotten his case. She remembered how quickly she handed down the sentence, trusting the officer's word without question. Marcus wasn't there to shame her, but his words carried the weight of his suffering. He spoke of his daughter's birthdays missed, his mother's heartbreak, and the friends who turned their backs. "I begged to be heard," he continued, "but the system wasn't built to listen to people like me." The tension in the room thickened as he turned toward the officer. "You knew I was innocent," Marcus said firmly, his voice steady but sharp. "You took my life from me for your own gain. But the truth has a way of coming out, no matter how hard you try to bury it." People in the gallery shifted uncomfortably, whispering to each other. The officer's face hardened, but he said nothing. The judge, however, looked different. Her usual cold expression was gone, replaced by something more vulnerable, regret. But Marcus wasn't finished. "I could be standing here, full of anger," he said, his voice softening but still powerful. "I could want revenge, but I've spent enough time in darkness. I choose something else." The judge's eyes glistened as she watched him, unsure of what he was about to do. The room felt frozen, every person holding their breath. What could he possibly do next, after all he had been through? Then Marcus stepped forward and did something no one expected. And in that moment, the judge's composure broke. Her face softened, and to the shock of everyone watching, tears began to fall. The room was frozen, every eye locked on Marcus. But instead of anger, his next words carried something unexpected: grace. "I forgive you," he said, his voice steady but raw. His gaze never left the judge's, and in that moment, her mask of authority cracked. A tear slipped down her cheek, but Marcus wasn't finished. "Forgiving you doesn't erase what I lost," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. But I refused to let this anger chain me the way that Sel did. The room stirred with whispers, some confused, some moved. Even the officer shifted uncomfortably, his eyes narrowing, unsure of where this was going. But Marcus wasn't speaking for them. He was speaking for himself. The judge, her voice soft but shaken, finally spoke. I believed I was delivering justice. But I failed you, and for that, I am deeply sorry. Her words felt genuine, but Marcus's eyes turned back to the officer, the man who had started this nightmare. You, Marcus said, his voice firm again, may have stolen my time, but you won't steal my peace. But beneath the surface, there was more to this story. Unknown to most, Marcus had spent his time in prison uncovering the truth. The officer's false testimony wasn't a random act. It was part of a bigger cover-up. A cover-up Marcus had risked everything to expose. And now there was proof. Proof he had fought to bring to light. The tension climbed as Marcus reached into his pocket and placed a flash drive on the judge's bench. This, he said, his voice calm but sharp, is everything the world needs to know. The lies, the corruption, and who profited from my suffering. The judge's face tightened with concern as she glanced at the drive. The officer's face, however, turned pale. He stood abruptly. This is ridiculous, he gulped, his voice cracking. But his panic was showing, and the room felt it. The judge's eyes flicked between Marcus and the officer, her heart racing. She knew the stakes were higher than she ever imagined. And as her fingers hesitated above the flash drive, one thing was clear. Whatever happened next would change everything. The room felt like it was holding its breath. The judge's hand hovered over the flash drive, her fingers trembling. She could feel the weight of the moment. The choice she was about to make could shatter careers, expose corruption, and rewrite the story of Marcus's life. The officer's voice broke through the tension, loud and defensive. This is nonsense. He's trying to manipulate the court. His words were sharp, but his eyes betrayed him. Nervous, darting around the room as if searching for an escape. But Marcus didn't flinch. You can keep lying, he said calmly, his voice cutting through the officer's panic. But the truth is already here. You just don't want anyone to see it. His heart pounded, but his voice was steady. He had lived through his worst nightmare. There was nothing left to fear. The judge's eyes met Marcus's again, and in them, he saw the battle she was fighting. She wasn't just weighing evidence, she was weighing her own conscience. If what's on this drive is true, she began, her voice low but heavy with meaning, then everything about your case, about my courtroom, was a lie. Suddenly, a voice from the gallery rang out, a woman, trembling but determined. Your Honor, she said, standing nervously, I know something. The room shifted, all eyes on her. I worked in records, and I saw files disappear. Reports altered. I was scared to speak up, but I can't stay silent anymore. The officer's face turned red with panic. This is ridiculous, he shouted, but his voice cracked, the authority slipping from it. He started to step forward, toward the judge, toward Marcus, but the sound of approaching footsteps stopped him. Two uniformed officers, their expressions grim, moved toward him. The tension was unbearable. Marcus felt his chest tighten, but he held his ground. This was it, the moment everything could change. The judge's hand finally closed around the flash drive, her knuckles white. She looked up, her voice cold and firm. This court is not adjourned. This is only the beginning. And in the electric silence that followed, it was clear. Something explosive was about to unfold. The judge inserted the flash drive into her computer. The room felt like it was holding its breath, every eye glued to the screen behind her. Then the footage began, grainy. but clear enough to show what really happened the night Marcus was arrested. It wasn't him committing the crime. It was someone else. And there, in the corner of the frame, stood the officer watching, then turning and walking away. Guests rippled through the courtroom. The officer's face drained of color. This is fake. He stammered, but his voice was shaking. He's trying to frame asterisk me asterisk. But before the judge could respond, the video continued. And this time, it showed something even more shocking. A second man appeared on screen, handing the officer a thick envelope. The audio crackled, but a few words came through. Asterisk, take care of it. He's the perfect fall guy. Asterisk. The courtroom erupted. The officer's panic was now pure terror. He backed away from the bench, his eyes darting toward the exit. But it was too late. Two bailiffs stepped into his path. Don't move, one of them warned. The judge's voice was firm but cold. Officer Reynolds, do you have anything to say for yourself? But then something unexpected happened. The officer's expression shifted, not to regret, but to something darker. You think this ends with me? He said, his voice tight with anger. You have no idea how deep this goes. Suddenly, the doors at the back of the courtroom burst open. A man in a suit, flanked by two lawyers, walked in. His presence seemed to freeze the officer on the spot. The man's voice was smooth, but his eyes were sharp. Your Honor, I'm here on behalf of the department. We'll be taking over this matter from here. But the judge didn't budge. This is my courtroom, she said firmly. And the people deserve the truth. The man's smile was cold. Be careful, Judge. Some truths come with consequences. The tension in the room felt unbearable. Marcus's fists clenched. He had fought so hard for justice. But now it felt like something even bigger was closing in. And in that moment, one chilling thought crossed his mind. Asterisk, was he fighting something more dangerous than he ever imagined? Asterisk. The courtroom was thick with tension, but the judge's voice cut through it, steady and sharp. Mr. Reynolds, she said, her eyes cold on the suited man who had just entered. This trial is not yours to take over. The evidence speaks for itself. But the man's smile didn't fade. You don't understand, Your Honor, he said smoothly. This isn't just about one officer. It's about the entire system. And people like you. You're not supposed to dig this deep. Before the judge could reply, Marcus stepped forward, his voice firm. You're afraid, he said, his eyes locked on the man. Because the truth is finally out. And now you're losing control. The man's smile tightened. You really think this changes anything? He said, his voice cold. You were meant to disappear in prison. But you got lucky. Let me give you some advice. Walk away. Before you lose more than your time. The room felt ready to explode. But the judge, her eyes blazing, made her decision. Bailiffs, she ordered, her voice firm, take Officer Reynolds into custody. And place this man under investigation immediately. I will not allow this courtroom to be silenced by corruption. The suited man's calm shattered. You're making a mistake, he hissed. This won't end with me. Suddenly, a phone rang from the defense table. The judge frowned as her clerk picked it up. A hushed conversation. Then the clerk's face turned pale. Your Honor, she whispered, the FBI is here. They're requesting access to the court. They've been investigating this officer and his contacts for months. The doors opened again, this time with agents in suits, their badges flashing. We'll take it from here, one of them said firmly. The suited man's face twisted with panic. He spat at Marcus. You have no idea what you've done. But Marcus's voice was calm. I've done what you tried to stop. Tell the truth. As the agents led the officer and the man away, the room buzzed with shock. The judge, her voice softer now, turned to Marcus. "I failed you once," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "but not today." Marcus felt the weight of his battle lift. But as he turned to leave, his phone buzzed. One message, unknown number. 4 chilling words. Asterisk, this isn't over. Marcus asterisk. Marcus stared at the message on his phone, his heart pounding. Asterisk, this isn't over. Marcus asterisk. The threat was clear, but so was something stronger, the weight of everything he had fought for. He took a deep breath and slipped the phone into his pocket. "Maybe it isn't," he muttered under his breath, "but I'm not afraid anymore." The courtroom slowly emptied, but the judge stayed behind, her eyes heavy with reflection. "Marcus," she called softly. He turned to face her. "I can't undo what you lost," she said, her voice thick with regret. "But I promise you, this system will face what it allowed to happen." Marcus nodded. "I didn't fight for revenge," he said quietly. "I fought for the truth, so no one else goes through what I did." In the weeks that followed, the truth came out for the world to see. The footage from the flash drive went public, exposing the corruption that had cost Marcus his freedom. Headlines screamed of cover-ups and conspiracies within the department. Investigations swept through every corner of the system, and officers once untouchable were stripped of their badges. But Marcus's life wasn't about headlines. It was about picking up the pieces. He returned home to his mother, her eyes filled with both joy and pain. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered, holding him close. His daughter, hesitant at first, ran into his arms. "Are you staying this time, Daddy?" she asked softly. "Forever," he promised, his voice breaking. Opportunities came his way, interviews, offers to write books, but Marcus chose a different path. He started working with people like him, those lost in the cracks of the system, forgotten and unheard. His story became a voice for those who had none. The threats never fully stopped, shadowy messages, cold warnings. But Marcus knew fear could no longer control him. "You took my time," he would say to himself, "but you'll never take my purpose." One day, he stood before a group of young people, sharing his journey. "The truth," he told them, "is the most powerful thing you'll ever hold. It may cost you everything, but it's worth everything too." And with that, Marcus walked forward, not as a victim, but as a survivor, a fighter, and above all, a man who turned his pain into power.